A favorite thinker of mine is Leopold Kohr. He is a foreigner. He was an economist. He was a jurist. He was a political scientist. And he's known for his argument against the cult of bigness. He was against big, and he was for the small. And his great book is The Breakdown of Nations, and it's available online. I suggest you take a look at it. The Breakdown of Nations. The problems in the world in terms of geopolitics come from large entities such as the Soviet Union, such as United States, such as the Roman Empire, such as United Germany, right? Why is United Germany a danger, whereas the disunited Germany prior to 1850, prior to the time of Hitler arriving on the scene, how is that really innocuous and disorganized, right? If you like local economy like I do, David Tulis, and like free markets, you will tend to favor the small over the big. And that is what we argue for here. And I think in the concept of local economy and free market, there are many solutions. Now, the word local economy and free market is not say a secular alternative to the fruits of the gospel. Okay, we are a commercial radio station, and we're not here to promote the gospel directly, but we do understand Christianity and its world-changing, its counter-revolutionary, anti-empire, anti-authority, highly demanding system of life and thought, how that is, in fact, conquering the entire world. And the promise of the Bible is that by the end of time, the nations will have bowed their knees to God through the Son, Jesus Christ, by the power of the Holy Spirit, right? That's how that great work is done. There will be unity among men, probably the damage brought against mankind by God when we, as the book of Genesis says, as we went down to confuse their tongues. That damage, that humiliation will largely be over, right? And that will be because there'll be, again, a unity of tongue as there was before the Tower of Babel. The reason God confused man's language was that men were refusing to decentralize. They were refusing to scatter across the face of the earth, and intended rather to make a city and a name for themselves and to be an empire. That's what those descendants of Noah wanted to do, and God forbade it and scattered men, made them all repel one from the other by the confusion of tongues, the inability to communicate. Well, over time, that barrier, I think, will be broken down over time with the help, perhaps, of software. Look at Google Translate, for example, and other systems that let you hear almost in lifetime, in your own tongue, what someone else is saying, as picked up by the microphone of your device that translates it almost immediately into your own language. That is a very exciting development, again, toward the unity of men, not just in a particular country like Tennessee, but among countries, let's say, between the Congo and Tennessee. Okay, they're crossing that line. That's a much bigger language barrier, or that between Mexico and Tennessee. These are great barriers, but they'll be coming down over time as the work of the Holy Spirit progresses, according to the Scriptures. Right, this is all in the Bible. There's this great progressive optimism. There is in Christianity this theory. There is a social theory there. And it is one of progress. That comes from Christianity only. No other system of thought has a promise like that. Only Christianity has a theory of progress. Okay, so in this theory, and in your understanding of reading the Scriptures, if you have remembered to do so, you'll see this promise worked out, and men becoming subject to God. Now, when they become subject to God, guess what happens? Less war, less hatred, less greed, less inflation, less centralization, less bureaucracy, less hunger, less poverty, less pornography, less adultery, less bastardy, less baby killing. And then finally, toward the end of time, the work of the gospel, which is promulgated by two things, well, through the power of the Holy Spirit, two things: the preaching of the word on the Lord's Day from the engine of Reformation, that's the pulpit, right? That's an engine of Reformation. And by the reading of that same book, of that library of 66 books, the reading of it and the preaching of that book, will revolutionize all of humankind as it's done already. Just think of the long time before the resurrection. Man lost, just absolutely lost, and in utter darkness. Civilization after civilization perishing and lost. But then now there's that promise from the resurrection. That's what the Bible teaches, just basic Bible teaching. And so here now the question is of these hateful stories that we're reading. There's going to be this evening in Coolidge Park a gathering of people who have different ideas. Okay, now what we want this to be is a real argument, and we don't want it to be a police event. We don't want the police to so control things that people can't shout at each other. Okay, people need to shout. Let that happen. Let people let this not be a demonstration and it be that of the police, right? Let this not be a policing demonstration, but a demonstration of two sides in an argument. Now, the sides are, you could say, the Marxist, communist, anarchist side, the Antifa side, represented by the woman who called a coworker at the restaurant a Nazi. She was written up for it, and then later in the day, that man Terrence Hightower was fired by his local economy employer for having defended General Lee's monument. That is why that man was fired. He was fired for proposing to stand in public for General Lee and the monument there in Charlottesville. The woman who got him fired, apparently working at the same restaurant, who resigned later in the day. I've not been able to get her to call me, nor the owner of the restaurant. Neither have contacted me back through Facebook. They will be one side in this event, and the other side probably will be people like you, probably Trump Trump voters, Trump fans, conservatives, free market types, libertarian types, and somewhere some of the people there will be pro-black. They'll have a black perspective. They'll see things in terms of the black race. Others may have a kind of white perspective. See things in terms of the white race. Let there be a real dispute. Okay, let there be some shouting. Shouting is okay. I mean, I would say that that's a good thing. And police should not be there. It shouldn't be about the police. It should not be a demonstration, which in the end is a police demonstration, as it was when the racist National Socialists came and had an event in Chattanooga. It was a police demonstration in the end, though there were far more anti-protesters, counter-protesters, than there were those who had the permit to use the courthouse lawn that afternoon. Let it not be that we feel too much the strain of the police state, though the mayor does represent the local interests of the police state through his agency, the police department, serves Mayor Andy Burke. Let Mayor Burke allow for open, even avid argument. Maybe some spitting. Maybe some people will throw spittle in a bit of spray as they shout across the way. Let that happen. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can't say, well, you need to prevent all civil disorder and to prevent a riot. Just because a couple people are scuffling doesn't mean it's a riot. Okay, that doesn't mean it's a riot. Let people be manly. Let them have it out. That I think is a good thing. Though I would say if one side, if the Antifa people are going to come with clubs and guns and start shooting the Trump supporters, well, then you've got a problem. Then we do have a riot, and then we would expect those bodies representing the statute and the law to intervene. Again, respecting the right of free speech, right? We do have First Amendment rights. We do have a right to assemble. We have the freedom of assembly without a permit, right? That is to say, you have a permit when you're reserving a piece of ground at a certain time. That's all the permit's needed for it. But anybody can meet whenever they want in any numbers they want. There's no ban on anybody doing that. That is not an unlawful assembly. Unlawful assembly is a charge from the Wehrmacht. That is a charge that we have thrown into the newsprint in the old Soviet Union, right? When Pravda would say it was an unlawful assembly of people reading Solzhenitsyn's book and hearing a lecture about it. That is an unlawful assembly in that perspective. Now, to get back to the overall goal here, the goal at the David Tulis show at Nooga Radio is to propose that there is a solution to what we're reading about and hearing about, and there are several. They work in several strands, right? Some you might say are personal to you, my listener, and others are strands that we'd like to see develop in culture at large, beyond you and beyond me, right? You, my listener. These are things that we'd like to see happening permeating outward across the fruited plain. There's so much support for it already, and I think there are evidences of this line of thinking. And that would be the solution. Personally, would be this: be reluctant to take up an offense. Be reluctant to make an issue of a monument. When there wasn't an issue last year, and are going to make it one now this year just because people are being quoted in the press as saying that we can't have this anymore. We can't. We have to take these down, as the Baltimore mayor did one recent night. All four in Baltimore in secret. Is that the solution? I think if we take up an offense, we're going to be offended. I think that the willingness to be offended is a kind of pseudo righteousness, a pseudo virtue, and people work themselves up to have that virtue because evidently they can't have it by other means. They can't have it by pacific, peaceful, amicable means. Reformation and racial reconciliation cannot happen in an occasion that is made louder in its volume by anger, by claims of being offended, by screaming. These are things that we have liberty to do. Of course, I'm not saying we should not do them freely. We should, if the liberty, if we have that liberty and need to exercise it, well, so be it. But the real racial reconciliation takes place by acts of love and mercy individually. Usually, it has to be man by man, person by person. And so, for example, people say, "Well, boy, I'm David Tulis, and I'm the Trump station." Okay, I'm not a Trumpian. Okay, but our station is considered right wing. It's considered pro-Trump, pro-free market. Even Republican, though I'm hardly a Republican. But on the other hand, that might tar us in a certain direction, right? That might even bring us to the attention of the SPLC, right? the Southern Poverty Law Center, as being a pro-Trump multimedia platform, even though I'm not. Well, listen, I'm a classical liberal, okay? Just think about that. I'm a classical liberal, and I like saying that to people because it throws them. They don't quite know what to make of it. Here's what I say. I say, when I meet someone, let's say at Hamilton Place Mall on my sales rounds, I say, well, listen, I'm a classical liberal at the right-wing Trump station. And that person just immediately is drawn to me. She thinks, oh, I'm so glad you're there. I'm holding back the tide. I've heard that several times now. But a classical liberal is someone who is liberal and is distinct from a progressive liberal. Okay, I want you, my listener, to maybe a little bit more like me in your thinking about politics and law. The progressive liberals are statists, right? They are nationalists with a strong interest in the state welfare system. They believe in salvation by public works and by engaging the leisure classes to administer these giant programs, these giant bureaucracies, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, or food stamps, as they're still called that. That way, we have salvation by administration. The classical liberal like me, I believe in the free market. So there is no government bureaucracy that can ever do right. Even a standing army is wrong, right? We have, and I borrow that from the Hebrew Republic, which had no standing army at all. It had militia. Every man was trained in sword and spear to carry his shield as needed, and there was no standing army. There were no chariots built up for offensive operations, right? War was purely a defensive measure. And so the classical liberal idea that we are learning about here with me, your neighbor, David Tulis, right? Love your neighbor, buy local. David Tulis has in view this racial progress, which is long-standing and long in the making. It's already taking place. We hear in the press how race relations are frayed in this country. Well, no, they're not frayed in this country. They are in some quarters, but generally they're not. When I meet black people, I'm always very respectful. I bend over backwards to say yes sir, no sir. I get the door. I'm respectful. I'm helpful, and I do that because I know there's that grievance by the black man against the white man who enslaved him up till 1865. Right, that's 150 years ago. I'm still trying to make good for my Anglo-Saxon people enslaving the black man, and I do that in Christian goodwill, in amity and grace. God has forgiven my sins. I'm a big sinner, David Tulis. God has forgiven me my sins, and so I want, that's grace. I want to exhibit that grace to other people, And so I want to do that by helping people and caring about people and asking questions about people. That's what I do. I ask questions. I'm the man who asks the dumb questions in Chattanooga. And I want to ask, I ask dumb questions of the mayor. I ask dumb questions of the chief of police. And I deal with a great deal of humiliation on the part of by the city government against me because I asked the wrong questions. I'm sorry, I'm just dumb. I'm a slow man. I ask the slow man questions, and if I do that in a context between the races, it's always to help somebody. I'm always there. How can I help you? What do I need to know about you? What can I do for you? That's what I do, and that's how we got to meet Hanson Melvin, and encouraged him in a godly path of standing up for his rights, standing up for his constitutional rights, making the Constitution live in his context, in his life. And here now he is suing the city of Chattanooga and a fired police officer for violating his constitutionally guaranteed God-given rights, his inherent and unalienable rights. As a black man, he has them, and he needs to defend those rights. He needs to live that out every day. And here he's standing his ground and being a heroic example. He is an example that we offer everyone, not just black people, but you, my listener, and others as well. The solution to these problems that we're having debated today around us are, as I say, grace. And I'm getting into something now that's a little tricky. We have the Tower of Babel. We have this picture of man needing to separate to form independent nations, independent tongues, separate and distinct cultures, right? And the reason God did that is because when men have one tongue and one empire, it's easy for sin to spread. If you have a decentralized social order, which is what Christianity even now envisions, Christianity envisions a decentralized, a horizontal social order rather than a vertical one, right? That's what you have in Christianity. You have liberty and freedom. You have constitutional government, and you have growing affinity and desire to obey, affinity with God, a growing desire to obey God. That's progress, right? That's the steps toward redemption of mankind as a whole, right? That's the general trajectory of humanity is from judgment in the garden to redemption, and that's a progress that's increasingly in favor of man. More and more people being saved, more and more people hearing the gospel, more and more people hearing the commandments, what God expects of sinners to do, to obey those commandments, to love and fear God, to enjoy Him forever. That's what Christianity wants men to do, to enjoy God forever in liberty and an end of enslavement, the chief being, of course, sin, the sin problem. The number is 800-8949, 800-8949. Now, getting to the question about the Tower of Babel is God decentralized society, and that's why we don't favor nations. I don't favor nations. The problem that we have in our country is the fact that we have a nation, the fact that we have a president who oversees and governs 260 million people. That's far. It's too big to be practical. It doesn't work. It's continuing tyranny at every level. That's why we need to have a breaking up of the nation. And I think we don't have to really push for this. We just watch it happen, okay? It'll probably happen in the lives of your children before your life is over. It won't happen in your life, but it will probably happen in the lives of your children. Certainly, by the time your grandchildren are pushing the toggle switch on the voting booth, it will have happened in remarkable ways. There are divine discontinuities, and I think that there may be some coming. We have others, though, that are discontinuities that are not divine interruptions, that are simply outworkings of men's decisions and the outworkings of national government, national debt-based, cartelized, corporatized state and national governments around the world. And that's an economic, in short, you could call that an economic disaster, right? A loss of confidence in the way things are. That will be reflected in the equities, the stock market. I think David Stockman is right. There is a thunderous meltdown just ahead. There's not anything under that market. Now, the question that I don't have time to get to it right this second, but the question that I want to get to next is the nation and the breaking up of the nation. And there's one group labeled as a hate group, that has a terrific analysis on this point. And that's why you can't paying attention to these hate labels. And when you read AP copy or read New York Times copy or Washington Post or HuffPo copy on this, just say, maybe there's something valuable in that story by way of quotes or news. But remember, the word hate is it's a click. It's supposed to click you to have resentment and animosity towards some person or some group. And they're not all bad. Trump is right. They're not all bad. Some black nationalists have very good things to say. Some white nationalists, which would be League of the South, they are kind of a Caucasian-oriented group. They have very valuable things to say. And I've got a couple of quotes that I want you to consider from the League of the South. They are not a hate group by any stretch of the imagination, though they are, you could say they are the minority. Well, this is David Tulis with the Minority Report here in Chattanooga. David Tulis, Caucasian, but with the Minority Report.
In-depth traffic, news, and information. Mornings on Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7.